Good morning. This is Barbara Kolm again. We are running the Free Market Roadshow today out of Vienna, and I have the special privilege to have Dr. Richard Rahn sitting next to me. And Richard Rahn has been traveling not only extensively with us, has been fighting the good fight for freedom at the Free Market Roadshow. Richard is currently the head of the Center for Prosperity, Freedom and Prosperity, among many other things. He also runs enterprises, but the most important thing I think is he is one of the most cited public intellectuals in the United States, whether it's the Rahn curve or whether it's many other important points that Richard, who has a degree from Columbia University, among others, and he has also been at the Reagan and the Bush senior administration as an economic advisor. Above that, I think he also served at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce as the head economist. And how many other things did you do, Richard? Welcome, by the way.
What it shows when you get old enough, there's a lot of things you end up doing. No, it's a great pleasure to be here with you, and great work you and the Austrian Senate have been doing all these years. And again, I'm always honored to be with you and participate in your programs. You had mentioned I went to Columbia University. Given what's happened in the last few weeks, I'm almost embarrassed to admit that I am a graduate.
I was actually going to ask you because times have not much changed.
I was there when I was very young in the 68 riots and closed down the campus. And here they've replicated the whole thing. And it is so discouraging because after the 68 riots and shutdown, there were all these reports written about how to avoid this, what to do if this happens again. They did everything wrong. They ignored all the earlier reports. I mean, you should take immediate action. You shouldn't allow the students to occupy the buildings, and so forth and so on. And again, just like everything else.
And you just wrote an article, which I mentioned, I forgot to mention before, that you have your weekly column at the Washington Post. And you wrote an article, Washington Times, apologies, and that you wrote an article about how to follow the money when it comes to those riots. So what would be kind of the summary?
The 68 riots were actually funded by the economists of the Soviet Union at the time. And years later, we learned about all that happened, and that was all detailed out. And usually you have state actors funding this stuff. Who has an interest in the instability? And clearly Iran and China. And I expect when they finally do get all the details and how all this is funded, because these things are expensive. I mean, you see all these tents and all the materials, suddenly they just appear. I mean, that's not a group of random students saying, let's go live tonight. These things are planned out. So
no big difference. It's just the disaster is tremendous. The consequences for the universities will be bad. Funding will, of course,
it took Columbia
go somewhere.
20 years to
recover
from the last one. This time, I think it's going to be far worse for the Ivy League universities. The U.S. had built, 7 or 8 of the best universities in the world. And it's tough to get into. They had superb faculties and facilities. And this all been blown up. And now you have all these other schools competing. And I spent half my life in Florida, grew up in Florida. And I just watched how the Florida economy is taking off relative to New York or California. Florida's an absolute boom area, but also the universities. The universities get better and better and better. And if you have a choice between sending a student to Columbia or Harvard or to Florida State or University of Florida, to me, Florida.
Okay, well, and this is interesting, but you also picked up on the point with regards to economy. I mean, we saw that first when Texas all of a sudden was kind of a pull factor when people moved from California to Texas. Now everybody's also moving from California or New York down to Florida.
Yeah.
Why is that?
You have 8 states that have no income tax. Florida and Texas are the most notable. So,
No income tax is number one. Okay.
and they're business friendly. Californians primarily go to Texas and Arizona, Nevada, states around who are all much more business friendly and tax friendly. Out of New York and New Jersey, they go down to the Carolinas, but also Florida is the big one. Florida has no state income tax. Let me give you an illustration in concrete numbers. When I was a kid going to high school in Florida, we were a small state. And Florida population grew rapidly. New York at the time was the biggest state, then California took over. It's gone to the point where New York now has about 20 million residents, Florida 22 million. That change has taken place just in the last 4 or 5 years. The state of New York this year has a budget of $228 billion as a state budget. Florida is $109 billion. Florida spends half as much per capita, less than half as much per capita as New York. Yet services, the schools are far better than Florida. The highways, just the whole infrastructure, things work. In New York, you want to open a business, and the bureaucrats have all these rules and regulations and make it difficult for you. You're walking into a floor office, want to open a business, and they say, "How can I help you?"
Okay.
To change. And even the governor of New York said, "Oh, my tax base has moved from lower Manhattan to Palm Beach," which is true.
Yeah.
And all these billionaires, they've left. And the billionaires are now, the Silicon Valley group. A lot of them went to Texas, some of them to Florida. The New Yorkers, billionaires, the rest of it all in South Florida.
No, little bureaucracy or a little regulation.
Yeah, reasonable.
Efficient, effective government.
Yeah.
And no income taxes.
Yeah.
So
And
these are the solutions.
They have a friendly government. People say, "Oh, this is nice. People actually want us to be here." You say, "You want to create jobs? We'll help you. What can we do to help?" And it's just totally different.
Jobs create income taxes
And also,
for the government.
the court system. New York had the best court system in the world. Why so many of the international financial disputes was called the Southern District of New York in Manhattan. But these crazy people going after Trump just out of ritual just really have undermined the credibility of the New York legal system. And in Florida, we have competent judges. It's not politically biased. You go in, contract disputes and everything are settled quickly within a wholly efficient court system. And very little corruption in Florida.
The 3 points you made were actually just a secret recipe that Lee Kuan Yew used more than 50 years ago to create Singapore.
Yeah.
And so it can be replicated anywhere in the world.
Exactly. And I was born in Western New York State when it had been a boom area 150 years ago. It had been like the Silicon Valley, Rochester, New York had all these high-tech people. A lot of Germans had moved there. Tech companies like Bausch and Lomb and others had Kodak, all moved.
Yeah.
And then Florida has become the new high-tech center. I've been looking for more land around Cape Canaveral. Bought some. That area is going to be one of the premier areas in the world because finally they turned space into a profitable business. Yeah. For a while, it's sort of a hobby and some of the daydreamers. Last month, 3 days in a row, Elon Musk sent off huge rockets, each one containing 56 satellites. One guy. And now, when you're there in what we call the Space Coast, the rockets are going up all of them. These are all civilian, most of them. I mean, there's still some military, but most of it's civilian. And because it's profitable, they're doing enormous things in space that people can barely dream about. I was up there just 2 weeks ago. And Jeff Bezos, with his Blue Origin, he's built in just incredibly huge new facilities because these buildings are big. They have to be over 300 feet high just to put the missiles in and stuff. And the infrastructure is enormous. So billions are pouring in it. And these are the capitalists. They're not throwing away the money. It's ego trip.
Incentives, investments that matter.
In fact, I'm willing to bet that with Elon Musk, eventually his SpaceX will be shown to be the most profitable company he has. I mean, he became the world's richest man with Tesla and some of the others. But SpaceX has absolute unlimited potential. And now they're putting all this stuff together for the moon base and then the Mars base. And this is going to be
Advancement.
just a totally different world.
Let's talk about today now.
Yeah.
So we will have you speaking at the Free Market Roadshow on debt and public deficits and debt. So in a nutshell, what will you present?
The debt burden, with public debt burden, is also private growth of private. Public debt burden and all the major countries in the world has been growing at an unsustainable rate. And I'm talking about the major European economies, Japan, US, and even China. Now, Japan has a debt GDP ratio of 260%. China is about 141%. The United States, which had been low, is now about 121%. British, of course, and French. So all have unsustainable debts. To put it simply, what happens is people save. And if they put their savings into what we call productive capital formation, that is new plant equipment, it can be restaurants, it can be a little factory, it can be a shopping center, whatever. That's productive enterprise. To the extent those savings go into financing government bonds, that adds no new wealth. That is just paying for things people have already considered. And so you have an undermining of global capital formation. The reason economic growth rates have been so low around the world. Europe, you have basically stagnation. Yeah, and it's because the money is saved is all going to finance former government debt expenditures. But the worst case we're going to talk about is for years, the developed countries provided capital for the lesser developed or undeveloped countries to help them develop. The British Empire was a prime example. Money flowed out of London to build railways,
across the world, India, America, everywhere.
Australia, Canada, every place. What's happened? Interest rates are higher in the U.S. than most of the rest of the world. So people who save money, you can be in Africa, let's say be in Nigeria. You've got a small grain mill. You save a little bit of money. That money goes into a local bank, which has a corresponding relationship with a bigger bank like HSBC. And then they turn around and buy U.S. government bonds. So we have a huge outflow of money from the entire world into the U.S. As an American, it's very nice because our economic growth has actually been higher despite some bad policies. And we are living well and still investing a lot of new money. And again, Miami, in a way, is a prime example. Here is an absolute boomtown, building 100-story buildings. You have a huge flood of money out of Latin America. Latin American governments tend to be unstable. Fiscal monetary systems have never worked very well. So with wealthy Latin Americans, they send their capital to Florida, Miami, and they buy condos in Miami as luxury condos. A number of high-rise condo buildings with starting prices of $1 million a unit, going up to 15, 20 million. It's astounding. Many of these condo units are owned by rich Latin Americans who, if they invest into the U.S., they have easy access to the U.S. And it is their sort of safety. If things go wrong in their own country, they can really go to
the plane and
Miami, and they can be there legally. and have a nice place. But this is a huge distortion because we have the richest places in the world getting richer. Europe, Switzerland, of course, which continues to do it. And despite not having oil well, Scandinavia is doing well, of course. The Norwegians have all the oil well. And the rest of the world is there.
It's going down the drain.
And one of the most telling things is, for years, the U.S. at the end of World War II had about 30% of the world GDP was in the U.S. That slowly went down. It got down to about 20%. Then it started rising again. And Europe was primarily going down, much more of a stagnation. Because Europe used to have a bigger share of the global GDP than the U.S. And then Japan, the Chinese were rocketing up. They were taking a bigger and bigger share.
Well, with their growth rates of 8 plus 9%.
What happened 3 or 4 years ago, the Chinese economy performed less well, and now the Chinese share of world GDP is declining while the U.S. increases. This is all backwards.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's been fine for those of it in the U.S., but this is a house of cards, a global house of cards, which is going to come tumbling down. And it means that the buildings don't fall down, but we end up looking like Greece.
You say we end up looking like Greece. Greece has somehow maneuvered itself out of this mess. At least the last government, the conservative government, put strict structural reforms in place, reduced taxes, created the right incentives for people to invest. But it took them minimum 15 years to recover from the total disaster.
Yeah,
that
well, I mean,
had been
the economies come back, but Greece is still, the people in Greece, you got a flood of people in capital in Greece. Until that reverses. You can just sort of, where are people moving? I mean, we got this huge migrant problem in the U.S. When people are swimming a real grand to get into the U.S., you don't see them breaking down the barriers to get into China or India or places. You see,
those are big reasons. That's totally true. So what would you recommend? What recipe would you think would help Europe get out of this mess that we are currently in? And if you look at Germany used to be the economic engine of Europe. Germany is literally, falling apart.
Germany, that's a special case because they got into the green energy nonsense, and guess what? They found it was too costly. It doesn't work.
Well, but it's too late now.
It's not too late, but fortunately, there are smaller nuclear power units that are being developed. The first new ones are coming in the U.S. The French are doing things with them. And within 5-10 years, you can have a lot of new nuclear plants, which are a lot safer and easier to operate and less costly than the old ones. We also, in the U.S., have so much natural gas, clean burning fuel, and we could support most of Europe. Again, we have the regulations in the U.S. and the vitamin restriction, which are totally stupid, and then you have a lot of still regulations in the U.S. And one example of the most stupidity in Europe is the British. The British now increasingly find they have mountains of natural gas. For years they have, now with new fracking technologies. So Britain will be probably within a year totally sufficient natural gas to start exporting. But it's because the political class and the Greens that have stopped this, and Britain's getting poorer and poorer with these big deficits, and these could largely be eliminated just with energy policy alone.
So,
because the world, Europe in particular, is paying way too much for energy.
yeah, that's a magic bullet, actually.
Yeah, and here in the U.S., the amount they have found, again, with the new technologies, we have hundreds of years of oil and natural gas, and they keep finding more. And they could bring down the cost a lot in the U.S., again, if they had more sensible policies.
This all sounds logic and reasonable. So 3 3 points. How can we save Europe?
Yeah, again, the problem is politics. It's not, there's nothing fundamentally. You've got to reduce spending. Now we have this problem with these new wars in the Middle East and the Ukrainian-Russian war, that the European nations need to increase their defense spending.
Mm-hmm.
And if they don't, they'll just encourage the Russians. And to stop them, and you want to stop them now before we don't want to replicate Hitler over again. And we're so much of it. It's just meetings in London. And it reminded me of what I read about Europe in 1938. Everybody knows the disaster is coming, but people are going to the bars and eating and drinking well, and then, of course, the whole thing will blow up. So I said, reduce spending, but you got to reduce it, but you got to increase defense spending. So that's a contradiction. The social spending, we need to reduce on pensions and make the medical care much more efficient. We don't have to. We can get better medical outcomes with much lower spending, but we do. The U.S. and Europe, most places, very inefficient healthcare systems. I mean, all this can be done. And of course, what happens is if you have, when I say a monetary collapse, it's just the dollar becomes less and less. But the dollar is actually rising in terms of European economies, which says the market thinks the European economies are in worse shape. But that doesn't, people all say, well, the dollar's going to collapse. It's against what? And so we'll have these national currencies, but each year they'll buy less and less and less. And just since the Biden administration has been in, the dollar's worth about 20% less than it was when they came.
Well, there will be changes again, and there will be elections very soon. And as we all know, when a new president is coming in, the dollar is going up.
The problems are solvable, and we have known the solutions for a long, long while. And, the Austrian economist, and Hayek knew the solutions. He wrote about it, and of course, people didn't want to hear because
competing currencies.
Everybody wants a free lunch. And I said, no, you actually have to pay for lunch. I said, no, we don't have lunch. And now suddenly you got a huge lunch tab and there was no food.
Yeah.
So
that's what we are, where we are right now.
Yeah. Going back to Adam Smith, but particularly the more modern economists like Hayek, we're absolutely on the money. They just have to write what happened. And it's probably not the end of mankind, but it's, you read the history of Rome, it was the same stuff. The Romans got into big deficit spending. They turned Rome, the city in Italy, into a welfare state to buy votes. Yeah. And at that point, they didn't have TV, so they had bread and circuses. And if you've ever been to the Circus Maximus in Rome, you can see, we'll do a few chariot races and other things, keep the public happy, give them free food. And then finally, as Margaret Thatcher says, the trouble with socialism, you run out of other people's money to spend.
Exactly.
That's what happens.
Talking about money, let's shift gears for a second. You are invested in something that is called the aluminum coin.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well,
what kind of alternative is that, and how does it function?
Well, basically, it was pretty easy to determine that people like Hayek and others had been correct about money. And the whole idea of government fiat money, the government just print money, as all the major governments are doing, was going to lead to disaster. Anytime it's ever been done in the past, it always leads to disasters. And they always say, well, next time we'll do it right. First, they never do it right. So you need some real backing. And for a long period of time, most of the 19th century, we had gold. And we had the gold standard, and it worked actually quite well. And you could go back to the gold standard, but because of all the government regulations and other things, it'd be very difficult to do. So the question is, having money, some of your money, in hard assets of things that always had value. And again, most commodities, but metals tend not to disappear. And you put it in steel, but steel rusts away. And even things like copper, if you leave them out, and, it basically erodes away over time. Aluminum is like gold. You have a ton of aluminum sitting in an ingot in your backyard.
How scarce is aluminum?
Aluminum is actually the seventh most common material on the planet. And we also had this idea that scarcity gives value.
Yes.
And that's the people that Bitcoin have made that mistake. I mean, it's working very well to a point, but then what will happen is the price will become so high, it can't really function as money. Because the beautiful thing about gold was each year we'd mine gold, we had a little bit of gold reserves. Some years we had more gold, we have a little inflation, other years we had less gold, and they had some deflation, and that was the norm. But with something like aluminum, it is basically what we call bottled energy, because 40% of the cost of producing primary aluminum is energy, because aluminum, it's not like most metals, you just melt down. There's an electrolytic reduction process. It uses huge amounts of electricity. But once you have the primary aluminum, you can recycle it forever, like gold.
Yeah.
And so secondary aluminum grows with primary aluminum. And even now, the world concerns with more secondary aluminum, which is aluminum that's already been reused. Let's say the aluminum beverage can, billions and billions produced each year. First of all, those are recycled.
So, but coming back to the coin now.
The idea was how to make it easy for people to own aluminum. And you can go into your local home repair store and buy big sheets or pipes of aluminum rings. That's sort of awkward to have in your garage. So we decided what we've done, we have aluminum warehouses in Miami, which we've digitized and tokenized. And we've done this sort of an experimental basis, trying to find out what works and what doesn't. Well, the government hates it if we call it money, so we can't call it money. And our Securities Exchange Commission wants to regulate everything. And so I'm really thinking about moving the thing outside the U.S. where the regulation is more easier, because with this administration, they make it just difficult. We do it.
The coin be a barter, or what?
No, the
What
way-
can people do? Can they save with it? Well, if you invest in these coins, well, I mean, the value
Yeah,
will go
well,
up
right-
eventually.
What happens now, we've been selling them for about 3 years, and the people who own them, price goes up and down some, it's higher right now. So the value of the coin, which represents a kilo, each one of our coins represents 1 kilo of aluminum. And so you're somewhat speculating the price of aluminum, but aluminum's never going to go to zero because
Yeah.
it's the most useful of all metals. You can make anything out of aluminum. You can substitute for wood or plastic and anything else. So it'll always have real value. And because it's useful. And so that was the underlying notion. This is something which value will always be there. It's useful. And because it's found any place in the world, nobody can have a corner. Aluminum, basic raw material is well. Any clay or sandy beach will have a lot of aluminum in it. And in the tropical areas, you tend to have places that have more concentration. They call that material bauxite. But it's usually, you look at it, it's like clays. And with technology, we can break that down to aluminum and metal. And it's that conversion process that gives aluminum its value.
So an alternative to savings and to investment.
It's another way to preserve capital.
Yeah.
And then have these. Then we have issues depending on the country. In the U.S., we have a capital gains tax that they want to apply to trading aluminum. which makes no sense. A lot of places in Europe, we don't have that. And so, as we work our way through this, what we're doing now is doing more aluminum trading because there's different aluminum prices all around the world and scrap. Some scrap has, say, nickel in it, or some has manganese in it. So they all have these different prices. So we're learning how to go ahead and build a real scrap or metals trading business. And as we build up our inventories of aluminum from that business, we can use that as the asset for the coin. And fortunately, those involved we're not a group of 20-year-olds who have to make $1 billion or more. We're a group of old guys who basically are saying, we're going to figure out how to make this thing work. And none of us has to, we don't have to worry about next meal's coming. And so we're just building, we're trying to do it very solid, totally transparent. And I'll be in London next week, and I'm going to be talking to a woman professor at Cambridge who has done a doctoral dissertation in this and studying the thing in detail. And we're talking to a lot of smart people around the world to work out all the bugs. And our original investors, both the company, but the ones that bought the token, have done just fine because it's to buy the token, you're buying aluminum in the same way you would if you went to a hardware store, except this one is digitally. But you can go to our warehouses in Miami
You can exchange it and
actually see, what if you want a tube of aluminum or a sheet of aluminum in exchange for your token, we're happy to give it to you. But so far nobody laughed for that. But it's like combined exchange. It's the same thing. And the problem in today's world is running through finding the most efficient regulatory structures and systems, efficient tax systems. And so mechanically, we got the software, we know how to do that. And so it's, we'll be looking at various locations to probably do more marketing of the coin. But right now, we're doing aluminum trading business and building up our stock capital on the business there. And it's nice to have, I've been in business before, and, all this great pressure to really make the thing profitable and all that. And this one, it's a small group of investors who are in a position where we didn't get a return, but we knew if we had it all worked out, this thing was going to be immensely profitable in the long run.
Thank you very much, Richard. So we did a broad spectrum covering many things that you've been involved
over the last 2 weeks.
Yes, exactly, just the last 2 weeks. Thank you very much. Stay tuned. This was Dr. Richard Rahn and Barbara Kolm.